I think the number one that I just see over and over again is the corporate humanism, and this idea that companies are rediscovering that there's real people behind them. And I think the nice thing is that as they discover that, you end up having a lot of benefits that they don't expect. So, of course, when you start to get more people within an organization talking about what they do, you can have more engaged employees. And I think we heard during the event that that was the number one challenge for a lot of brands, to keep their employees engaged. I think the other thing, though, is that when people understand why your company does what they do, they have a deeper connection to what they buy. And in a lot of cases, it's not so much the question of, do I sell something to someone once? It's, can I sell it over and over again? Do I have any loyalty? Or are they just going to skip to the next product or the next service the next time they need something? And that's, I think, the challenge for all brands. Well, I think on some level, the idea that you have to involve the legal team in everything you want to say, and the fact that real-time communications has become so important, does kind of go against this idea of corporate humanism, because what happens is companies are used to being able to think about and pass through a committee everything that they want to say. And now, because of real time, if you need to respond to a tweet and you need to do it within a minute, you don't have the time to go through a community and go through a committee and get everybody's approval. So the only way to do that is to say to someone who might not be the CMO or the chief communications officer that it's their job to communicate on behalf of the company without anyone else checking it before it goes out. And that creates panic with a lot of companies, because now all of a sudden what you have is people working without the normal approvals that they're used to working with. And that's a challenge. You know, I think that if you were to think about what we get from a lot of these things, I think the best use of technology is when we start to augment the experience that we're already having. So I have a better time, I learn more, I do more because of technology. That, I think, is a great use of it. The negative use of it is when people start to use technology to replace things that they would have done otherwise that are positive. So when you start to communicate with people on Twitter instead of going to an event where you meet them in real face-to-face, that's a problem. That's not so good. But I think when you use technology to augment the experience, to make it better, to make it easier for people to find out who they might connect with, to create stronger networks, those are all great uses of technology. And I think that there's a lot of social media that could go either way. And I think that part of the challenge is on the technology, but part of the challenge is for each of us to understand how we use the technology and how we don't. I think it's different for different people. But I think that one of the things that we all have in our culture, and it's different again from culture to culture, is the idea of the social norms of a culture. So for example, if we're having a face-to-face conversation, is it acceptable for me to stop our conversation and respond to a tweet?
Is it?
I don't think so, but
same.
You know, but in some cases, you know, people might disagree with that. They might say, well, you know, this is a social event, and therefore that's more important. Or they might, for example, be using technology to be able to go somewhere while they're working. So you imagine the situation of a doctor on call, and now, you know, if they get a text message or a pager alert, which now can be text messages saying someone needs them and they're on call, you know, that's acceptable, right? Because they're working. And so they stop their conversation and they respond to that, and they might actually save somebody's life. Mm-hmm. So, you know, it depends on the situation you're thinking about. But I think we each have to sort of understand that for ourselves and catch ourselves. And I think that's the important thing, that, oh, I'm focusing on the technology and not on the person. And I think that each of us have a responsibility to ourselves and to the people that we talk to say, you know what, now is the time to put the BlackBerry away, put the iPhone in my pocket, and just leave it there. I think it's great. I mean, I think that there is a very positive, there's a lot of positive things. And I think the most positive thing is that now you're putting the ability to share thoughts in the hands of each of us. So now you have this situation where anyone who has an idea about something can now put it out there and have it be found and explored and acted on. And I think that for so much of human history, there's been dictatorships where people's opinions have been suppressed. There's been people who are at such low levels in organizations that they could never get their ideas heard. And everything you would see would be the exception to the rule. So one person managed to get ahead. The famous 30-year-old probably now movie, Secret of My Success, where this guy who works in the mailroom pretends to be an executive just so he can get a chance. And that was really the only way you could do it. You had to fake it, you had to pretend, and then you just get lucky. And I think the beautiful thing about technology is that you don't have to wait for that anymore. If you have a great idea, you can publish it, you can start to write your own blog, you can get your own following, you can create it for yourself. And I think that's really powerful for anyone at any stage. I mean, it's not just young people who are trying to make it, it's also someone who's been working in the same job for 30 years and maybe their real passion is something else. And now they can explore that. I think that's great. Yeah, I think one of the other ones that I talked about was something I called ethnomimicry. And the idea was based on the science of biomimicry, and that we can find solutions to challenges that we have in nature. And that's what biomimicry is. So science says, how does, for example, a bird, like a hummingbird, how does it fly forwards and backwards? And if we can understand, because it's the only bird that does that, if we can understand that, then maybe we can apply that to aviation and help our planes fly better, right? So that's an example of biomimicry. The idea of ethnomimicry was that if we can understand how people behave in social networks and not allow social networks to take the place of it, but rather to help it, then that can be a really powerful force. And the example I used, one of the examples was Google+, and how it's been a social network that's duplicated how we interact with people and put them into different categories based on our relationships with them. And that, I think, has been one of the reasons why it's been so successful, because it allows you to now have that level of control to say, I'm out at the beach and I'm in my swimsuit and I don't necessarily want my work colleagues to see that photo, but I want my friends to see it and say that I'm having a great time at the beach. Well, I think a lot of times you find the best of humanity through the worst tragedies. And so I think one of the situations that brought out some amazing technology was the earthquake and the tsunami in Japan. And the idea that now people suffering through this sort of crisis, personal crisis, but also like real physical crisis, could get help in so many different ways with everything from getting supplies that they need, to finding their loved ones who they couldn't find, to getting an international community to help in that situation, but also to understand what's going on. And from a media point of view, report on what's really happening rather than what you might see from just a few small outlets. So I think that what we saw there, and it hasn't just been for that, I mean for Haiti and what happened there, we saw the same thing. It's technology stepping up and people who have the technology or who have the ideas saying, we have something that can help. And we're going to try and help. And it creates these really powerful moments of, I think, human bonding. I mean, you start to forget about the countries and us versus them, and you start to think about people as people. And I think we need more chances to do that without the tragedy, to force it. Well, I think one of the ways, the potential of one of the ways is what happened in Europe with the euro, and this idea that we're no longer these we are individual countries, but we have something that ties us together. And I think that idea, although I know there's been a lot of back and forth recently about it with the economies and everything like that, if you think about human history and the fact that before that happened, the only situation where you ever saw that happening was conquering. So, somebody would build a great empire and they would conquer all these places, and then they would bring it together, and then they would build all the roads and do all of the things, but it was a brutal war-based thing. And here it was a social-based thing to say, let's unite our currency so that we can actually make it easier for people to go from one place to the next place. And in our modern lifetimes, I think that's a really powerful idea. Yeah, I think there is something to this idea. I mean, we have the same thing in India. If you think about it, I mean, India was so many different kingdoms and not united until after the British left, and then it became kind of this one nation idea. But if you travel from place to place in India, the languages are different, the customs are different, the food is different. It's very, very unique. And even though you sort of have the same problem that the gentleman was talking about when it comes to the Middle East and North Africa, that people just put it all together and say, this is one place, so tell me what I'm going to do in one place. And it's very, very different. I think one of the major challenges that a lot of companies are struggling with, and this is a big brand challenge, is how do you take something that is happening that is great on behalf of a brand and scale it to happen in more places for more people. So there's a lot of brands, when you think about social media, who have one great Twitter person, who's really interacting with customers and doing amazing things and getting a lot of positivity coming from that. You have one person who's doing an amazing blog. You have a great person creating video. But how do you create more of that? How do you make it not just one person? Because that person might leave. And also there's a limit to how much content and how many people one person can ever engage. And I think the challenge is that a lot of times in these big companies, and small companies as well, we tend to put tasks along with job titles. And we say, because your job title is PR manager, these are the 5 things that you should do. Not because you're good at them, but because that's what your job title says you should do. And I don't think that's the right way to approach it, because now what you have with social media is capturing people with different types of skills. One of the things that I wrote about a while ago around this whole idea of social media experts, and a lot of people calling themselves social media experts, is that I challenged the fact that people were talking about that as a single thing. You were either a social media expert or you weren't. And I wrote this whole blog post about how there's actually 12 different types of social media experts. Some people, for example, are great at fostering an online community, asking questions, getting people involved, and being sort of a community manager. Other people are really good at doing events. That's their really great thing. They can bring people to events, they can create a positive person-to-person interaction. That's what they're really good at. And as soon as you start taking it all together and saying, I'm a social media expert, I'm good at all of that, I don't think it works, because people have different skills. So I think the real challenge for these big companies, and the question you asked me is what's their biggest challenge, is how do they find the right people within the organization to unlock their potential when sometimes it doesn't have anything to do with the job title that they've got. And that is a huge challenge, because now you start to bring in the fact that you've got all of these different divisions. You've got your customer service team, you've got your marketing team, you've got your PR team, you've got your product development people, and these are all different functions. So now all of a sudden some companies might need to say, well, the best person to tweet about our product is not the marketing person, but the product development person, who's usually never put in front of customers, but they have the best knowledge and maybe they have the best voice. So it's a big challenge. It's a people issue. I mean, I think that ultimately a lot of business challenges come down to, do you have the right people? Right. Can you hire the right people? And I think what complicates it is you hire people for certain job titles, and then they do whatever that job title says. And the best organizations are the ones where they hire the people who can do many different things and do certain things really well. And then they let them do the things that they're really great at. And that's difficult. Well, I changed the letters probably. Can I do that?
No.
I mean, PR is PR, but I think what it should be is, and maybe public turns into like personal relations, and so I can keep the PR. See, but ultimately, I mean, human relations is really what we're talking about, which is, are you able to take a company and an organization and relate it to a person, to a customer, and to an employee of that company on a human level, on a human basis? Are you speaking with a human voice? Is it something that's authentic, that's genuine, that's not just made up marketing language? That's the really big challenge, I think. I was thinking complementary, as in, to me, complementary services and complementary solutions are probably things that work together in a way that a lot of times we don't see in business. So because of this problem of having the silos and having each different group, and everyone's sometimes fighting for the same budget, so there's very real challenges, right? Like, it's not unlimited money. So if this person gets more money for their division, then this person gets less. That's the way it works in a lot of companies. So they're incentivized not to complement each other. And I think that's a huge mistake. And I see this all the time on the agency side as well, where a client might have 3 different agencies or 10 different agencies, and everyone's trying to get their own piece of it. And the incentive model for working together has to really, really have to work hard to find it, because it's not built in. And that's a big problem, because now you're challenging people to go against something that's in their best interest, and that never works. Well, I think the best way to find someone who's going to be great at a role is to find someone who is passionate about what they do first and has the skills second. And so you flip the model in a lot of cases, because a lot of times we think, well, here's our 5 skills that they have to have. And then we go off and we look for like the personality fit and all of those things. It's backwards. When actually what we should do is look for the personality fit of someone who would fit our team, who would be passionate about the work, and who's intelligent enough to be able to learn the skills that they maybe don't have. That's the better way of hiring. And if you think about really successful companies that have changed the way that they hire people, that's primary. I mean, that's what they look at. The culture fit first, the passion, and secondarily, the skills. Because you can always teach somebody hard skills. But passion is a tough thing to teach. Yeah, I think this forum has been an amazing chance to hear perspectives from so many different countries and places around the world in a way that a lot of times you don't get. And I think the fact that we all are isolated in this place in Davos, and that we can all spend a few days together is something that I wish I saw more often in the industry.